So, Geoff, welcome to the Suspicious Transaction Report.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So last time we sat down, it was about a different book, The Lazarus Heist.
Yeah.
This time it's about Rinsed, your new book, which we really enjoyed celebrating last night at your party. But before we get into the book, you're a kind of tech advertising guy by background. How did you come across the issue of money laundering and financial crime, and why did you suddenly find it so fascinating?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I've covered cybercrime for quite a lot of years, more than 10 years. And, the last book I wrote was The Lazarus Heist, which is, of course, about North Korea and how North Korea became a computer hacking superpower. And what was interesting was, I think when I first started covering cybercrime, I had the impression, which I suspect a lot of the public have, which is that these cyber criminals are sort of boy geniuses, usually men doing it, in hoodies, and they type in a few lines of code into a keyboard and the money's gone, But as you investigate these things, as I looked into hacking, including the North Korean hacking, what I realized was that, yes, computer hackers are very good at breaking into places they're not meant to be, including banks and cryptocurrency companies and so on. But once they sort of get in there and they get their hands sort of virtually hands on the money, if you like, moving it is a different job. Hackers understand server vulnerabilities, malware, social engineering, phishing emails. That's all the hacker type stuff. But the money, you need to understand SWIFT transfers, IBANs, money mule accounts, crypto exchanges, Bitcoin wallets. Hackers don't necessarily understand all that stuff. So when they get their hands on the money, they need help moving it, hiding it, and in extricating it, which is money laundering. So as covering all of these different sort of hacks, I realized that actually money laundering was the other half of the picture. And interestingly, without the laundering, the hackers just can't work. So again, one of the famous North Korean jobs was the Bangladesh bank job back in 2015. They hack into the National Bank of Bangladesh and they're going to steal $1 billion. What's interesting is they break in February 2015. That's when they get access to the bank's networks. They then move the money out in February 2016. That's a whole year and a year's delay. Now, that's really, really dangerous for a hacker. At any point in that year, they could have been locked out, or Bangladesh Bank could have renewed its software and shut them out and accidentally deleted the hackers' viruses. Why wait a year? It's because they needed laundering routes for that money. Where are you going to put $1 billion? Well, that's what took them a year, scratching their heads, wandering around the world trying to find the escape route. And so without that escape route, the hackers were literally stymied. They had to wait for the money laundering operation to kick in. So I thought, well, okay, money laundering is clearly the sort of next part of this that I need to cover.
So you must have been listening to the conversation I regularly have with the cyber director at RUSI, because this is precisely the conversation which we have, which is you focus on hardening the perimeter, on sort of trying to stop the malware attack, but there's always going to be a ransomware in here somewhere. And of course, when crypto came along, no surprise that ransomware suddenly took off. So Rinsed. So explain the title, explain what you were trying to achieve with this latest tome.
Yeah, so what I wanted to do was write a book about money laundering. Money laundering has a lot in common, I think, with cybercrime, cybersecurity. Complicated subject, bit dry, but one that people understand is important. And what I've tried to do with cybercrime is to make it accessible and make it compelling. Tell the stories, involve people, and use a sort of narrative storytelling kind of arc to get people interested in it, to understand it, which I think we did quite successfully with the Lazarus Heist podcast and also with the book. So what I wanted to do was do the same thing for money laundering. Take this kind of dry subject, can be dry subject, and make it compelling and make people care. And a key thing for me was I read money laundering stories, and there's a sort of classic thing of Bank X gets fined X million for compliance failures, and you think to yourself, well, what who was this drug dealers going to the bank? What happened here? The famous NatWest case is a case where NatWest got caught out. There was shopping bags full of money going into the bank. The bank was fined, a huge fine for NatWest for doing that. Then we find out that actually the money was coming from a sort of corrupt business based nearby. But even then, you haven't got the full story because we think the money going into that corrupt business was from drugs. So the story's almost being told backwards. The bank and the fine come first, and then we find out the people putting the money into the bank, and then we find out where that money came from. As a human being, you want to start at the beginning. Some drugs get sold, here's the cash from the drugs, there it goes into the business, there it goes into the bank. So I wanted in the book to try and start every case with the crime, the predicate crime as they call it, because that's what people care about. Frankly, I don't think people care about money laundering, but if you say, right, there's drugs, prostitution, fraud, okay, now we've got a victim, now we've got a crime, now we've got some money, and here's where that money goes, here's the laundering, then people care about the laundering, is my hunch anyway.
So the other thing you do in the book is you basically take the reader on a kind of journey through the history of money laundering and the way tech has supercharged that. So you kind of start with the kind of traditional Escobar and the cash being stored, in the ways that it was hidden and the big challenges that Escobar had. But I think where we first see tech in the book, I think, is where you talk about a story from the northwest of England. So maybe you could kind of expand on the sisters for us.
The Din sisters. Yeah, fascinating story. The Din sisters, Shazia and Abia, two sisters, middle-aged in their 40s. On the surface, they ran a beauty business in Manchester. So they sold hair curlers and lip gloss and stuff online. That was the surface. Behind the scenes, they were smuggling in heroin and dealing it across the northwest. And they created a sort of distribution network for this. Now, what was interesting was that they were generating a lot of cash. That was the problem for the Din sisters had. And that cash was being couriered around by blokes in cars, basically. And the police kept picking these people up and tracking them down and detecting them. And so the Din sisters were like, okay, we need to have a better system for this. Ultimately, what we need to do is take some of our drug profits, our cash, get it back to, we think, Pakistan, where they were sourcing the drugs, so we can pay for more drugs to come in. But A, our couriers keep getting arrested and they're carrying around suspicious amounts of cash. And B, even if we get it to a money broker, they're going to have to package the cash up, somehow transfer it across to Pakistan. Is the money going to get, frozen, interdicted, or is somebody just going to steal it from us? So they hit on the brainwave of using Bitcoin. They took the cash to a shady Bitcoin broker who went by the name Chemdog, was his ID. Chemdog takes the cash, gives them Bitcoin in exchange for it, obviously takes a cut of that, and then that's in Bitcoin. It's in the form of Bitcoin, so the Din sisters can send it wherever they like in the world. Obviously not using traditional banks, instantly, seamlessly, and without fees, being able to transfer it to wherever they want to transfer it.
And what happened to them? How did this end up?
They got arrested. They got nicked, and look, the police were onto their operation fairly early. The Din sisters, it wasn't their first go around in crime, put it that way. So as soon as they popped up on the police's radar, they put them under surveillance. They started arresting the couriers, and they worked their way up through the gang to the Din sisters. I mean, there were a couple of dozen people got arrested. I think the sentences added up to more than 100 years. What's interesting, though, is two things. Number one, the police managed to recover a load of stuff that was connected to the crime. So luxury cars, Rolex watches, a load of really designer clothes. That all got seized because the Din sisters, even though they'd used Bitcoin to try and launder the money, they hadn't successfully carried out all the steps you need for money laundering because the police could still link the goods to the crime. If you're a good money launderer, you clean your money so that when you buy your stuff, it's not connected to the crime. So even if the cops arrest you for drug dealing, they can't seize your car or your house because they can't link it to the crime. So the Din sisters failed on that point. But the one thing the police didn't seize was the cryptocurrency. Now, it's possible there's still millions of pounds of drug proceeds from the Din sisters sloshing about in cryptocurrency. And when they get out from their, I think, 10 years plus jail sentence, that money might still be there for them. Might even be worth more thanks to Bitcoin's rise in value.
So that's a kind of recurring theme in the book, is the role of law enforcement and sometimes accidentally stumbling across the kind of the crypto element of this. How did you find, it was, you did a lot of interviews for this, how well equipped did you find law enforcement on both sides of the Atlantic, and indeed in Germany as well, I think you also looked at. How well equipped were they to deal with this kind of technological advancement?
I think things have really changed in the past few years. I think previously just explaining cryptocurrency to rank and file officers was difficult. I think that's changed. I think there's more training, certainly in the UK and the UK police force. In the US, it's a difficult picture because you've obviously got, sort of local and state and then federal level. At the federal level, the FBI has entire teams of people who just do crypto. I'm not sure how well that's replicated at sort of state and local police level. But I think what really changed the game in Europe and the UK was a case called EncroChat, of the EncroChat phones. These were highly encrypted phones that were incredibly popular with criminals. They were effectively hacked, penetrated by Dutch and French agencies, law enforcement agencies. And as those phones were broken open, certainly police in the UK started to see, oh my God, they're all using crypto. Like this is. It didn't come as a surprise to me, but I think for a lot of police officers it became as a surprise because it's like these criminals, crypto is all they're using. That's the entire financial edifice that we're facing. Right, we need to go after that crypto, understand it. So I think that's starting to change. Obviously the criminal community and also the crypto and tech community responds to that, and there's always sort of new innovations coming along. So yes, police are catching up, but you're in a racing battle, I think, with the crooks.
Now, another theme in the book is sort of the role that crypto has played in developing marketplaces. Let's call them that. Before we get into the crypto side of that, you obviously tell the story in the book of the history of Craigslist and Backpage, which of course deals full on with the fact that money laundering is not a victimless crime.
Yeah.
Here we're talking about prostitution, child sex exploitation, really, really unpleasant crimes. So maybe just shine a light on why that particular story is so important.
Yeah, well, as I say, I wanted in the book to emphasize that money laundering is not a victimless crime. It's not this white-collar, spreadsheety numbers game. There's real suffering behind this. So we obviously start with cartel drug dealing, and then the next couple of chapters after that deal with sexual abuse and sex trafficking of both adults and children. The site you're talking about, Backpage, became infamous because Backpage was a sort of classified ads site, and people advertised all sorts of stuff on there. Then there were prostitution services being advertised, adult services. Now, interestingly, Backpage managed to get away with that because although prostitution is illegal in the US, it's illegal at state level. Freedom of speech, of course, is protected at federal level. It's constitutionally protected. And the ability for websites to publish first and ask questions later is protected at federal level. And so whenever anybody went after Backpage and said, you are advertising prostitution services on behalf of people, prostitution's a crime, you're making money off the crime, Backpage could get away with it by waiving the protections they had, the freedom of speech protections, and saying, you can't touch
This is the famous Section 230 of the CDA.
Yeah, the Communications Decency Act, which it protects basically websites and platforms, like Facebook and so on. They can effectively publish first and then be questioned later. They don't have to vet things before they get published like a newspaper would. And that makes sense. I mean, if Facebook had to vet every photo before it went live, your holiday selfies would never make it onto the site. However, it causes huge problems because sites can effectively publish first and ask questions later. Now, in Backpage's case, what was interesting was year after year, people went after Backpage. Kamala Harris, the now vice president of the US, was going after Backpage again and again, trying to take this site down. People were pretty appalled by what was happening. Backpage's owners were saying, look, we defend freedom of speech for whoever. You may not like people who run prostitution operations, but they have freedom of speech too, was the argument they used. In the end, it was money laundering that did for them. Because with money laundering, brilliantly, you don't have to prove the crime. You don't have to prove that prostitution was happening. You simply have to prove there was an offence at the back of this and money was made, and then you go after the money. So recently, Backpage's co-founder was charged with, I think it was 80 offences, including prostitution and supporting prostitution and so on. They cleared on all those charges, not found guilty on all those charges, found guilty on one charge, money laundering. That's what it did for them in the end.
It's pretty impressive, actually, when you look at the way US law enforcement works, how often money laundering, wire fraud, something to do with finance is actually the undoing of empires that otherwise, it's the kind of the Al Capone thing, isn't it? Tax fraud is what got him down, not murdering people or anything else. Now, those were kind of early day kind of online marketplaces. Indeed, obviously didn't start online. Then you start exploring the kind of the Alpha Bays and the Hydras and so on. So again, maybe just explain to listeners how tech and money laundering and crypto and all that sort of came together to create this community of dark markets.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. Well, so obviously there's a dark web, which is a sort of hidden, secretive corner of the internet where people can set up websites and effectively it allows the trade in all sorts of illegal goods. So drugs, for example, fraud tools, stolen credit card data and so on. And also, things like child sexual abuse. That all exists on these sort of dark web sites. Now, what's interesting is obviously you need some payment mechanism for that. And cryptocurrency arrived at, exactly the right time. I mean, it's amazing how these two pieces of technology, of dark web technology and cryptocurrency, sort of emerged not simultaneously. The dark web predates crypto by quite a long way, or at least things like Bitcoin by quite a long way. But they kind of come together at this almost perfect moment to allow that kind of trade to happen. So these sites obviously are accepting payments in cryptocurrency. Now, fairly early on, the crooks realized that things like Bitcoin are tracked through a thing called the blockchain, which is this publicly available ledger where all Bitcoin transactions are recorded. Now, you can't necessarily link the Bitcoin wallet addresses that are exchanging money. And if I send you some Bitcoin, all you see is wallet A sends Bitcoin to wallet B. But if you do enough sleuthing, you might be able to say, this is Tom Keatinge's wallet, this is Geoff White's wallet, and so on. So the crooks get wise to this fairly early on and start demanding and pushing for and trying to invent ways to launder the money, to disguise the trail of money. That's where we get into things like cryptocurrency mixers, which do that kind of anonymization piece. And that then becomes the battle, really, for these dark web services.
And there have been successes in sort of taking down these dark webs. You talk, I think it's Hydra, which is one which sort of burst onto the international scene, having been kind of very domestic. So maybe we could just explore that a bit. What is it what's the kind of the USP of these dark web marketplaces, which means that they become so popular?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So the sort of OG, if you like, of dark web marketplaces is Silk Road. Infamous site. Silk Road was mostly drugs. I didn't find much else apart from drugs when I was looking at Silk Road. Indeed, we did order drugs through Silk Road for immediate disposal, I should point out, to test this. And then you had things like Atlantis Market, again, drugs. Alpha Bay was interesting because Alpha Bay emerges after Silk Road was taken down. And immediately I saw you've got this site, Alpha Bay, that's not just doing drugs, but is also doing all the fraud, stolen credit card data, fake passports, everything. And that's why Alpha Bay became absolutely massive. Hydra was interesting because Hydra emerges sort of after Alpha Bay. And again, it was just drugs. What was interesting with Hydra was mostly Russian language. And the vast majority of it was drug distribution either in Russia or nearby former Soviet states, Belarus and places like that. So I thought, well, it's not particularly interesting, this site, because if you're in Russia, fine, but, I'm not. But then Hydra starts just making massive amounts of money. Investigators could trace, because Hydra makes its Bitcoin wallet addresses public, and the law enforcement agencies would do test purchases to sort of work out, okay, that's a Hydra Bitcoin wallet. Let's now monitor the money moving in and out of that wallet. And they started seeing billions. I mean, it was more than $1 billion a year for this site going into Hydra. So it's like, well, if they're serving a domestic Russian drug market, how are they making these billions? It turns out that people had cottoned on to the fact that Hydra could be used for money laundering. So you didn't even need to sell drugs on the site. If you wanted to launder some money, you could set yourself up with a buyer and seller account on Hydra. You could pretend to buy from yourself, put the money in, and then as a seller, withdraw the money. And effectively, you've used Hydra to launder your money. There was no drug sale, but Hydra's assisted you in laundering. So Hydra morphed from becoming a sort of Russian and near Russia drug sale site to being a money laundering behemoth. I mean, the thing was massive, absolutely massive. And that's what led it to be taken down was the US government started seeing ransomware attacks on the US, famously Colonial Pipeline. So hackers break in, scramble the files, charge a ransom to get the files back unscrambled. That money from ransomware, they were seeing flooding into Hydra. So that's when they targeted Hydra. It's like, okay, this is no longer a domestic drug issue in Russia. You are processing ransomware payments. We are coming after you. And eventually they managed to take Hydra down.
So that you touch on another interesting theme in the book, which is, we started this conversation, you said that, well, tech started playing an important role because people were earning money from hacking or from drugs trafficking or whatever it is. You want to then find ways of using that cash. So can you paint a picture of sort of the journey that we've gone on over the last 10, 20 years in terms of how people can actually use their ill-gotten gains in a clean manner?
Yeah. What's interesting, so, you're committing the crime. The classic sort of Pablo Escobar-esque period of time, money laundering, is the first challenge you've got loads of cash. What do you do with it? Having cash hanging around is bad for criminals. I mean, other drug dealers and criminals will steal it from you. B, the police find it innately suspicious. If you're caught with $1 million in cash, they ask awkward questions. And also inflation. I mean, if you just keep banknotes, inflation was running quite high in the last year or so, those banknotes will just be worth less and less. So what you're trying to do is get your money into a financial institution. What's changed in the last few years is money is increasingly digitized, finance is digitized. So that thing of, I'm a criminal, I've got loads of cash, what do I do with it? Certainly in terms of things like fraud and cybercrime and ransomware, you don't have that problem. You've not got wads of cash that you're trying to place into a financial system. You're stealing direct from people's bank accounts, so the money's already in the financial system, or you're getting people to pay ransoms in things like Bitcoin. So again, it's already digitized. The key emphasis now is on what's called the layering stage of money laundering, which is the stage where you have to mix the money around, change it into different currencies, different formats, different assets to try and throw the pursuers off. Because that's the key thing. You've got to, at some stage, throw the pursuers off and cut the connection between the money and the crime. That's the key challenge now. Getting the money into the financial system's not so difficult because it's already there, but it's traceable and trackable. Bitcoin's traceable and trackable. Online transactions, traceable and trackable. And most worryingly for the criminals, freezable, seizable. So what the criminal's job now is that layering stage, mixing stuff up to vanish the connection to the crime so they can then extract the money and actually use it.
And when we come to extraction, I mean, that in itself is not straightforward. You might have cleaned it, but how do you actually get it out of the crypto world or wherever it is and then actually use it to buy your yacht or whatever it might be?
This is super fascinating. This is where sort of the North Korean example comes in handy again. So North Korea is accused of stealing upwards of $3 billion in cryptocurrency, breaking into crypto exchanges and crypto businesses and just stealing the stuff, hacking the underlying code that lies behind some of this crypto stuff and manipulating it to basically siphon out money. And so, yeah, great. North Korea, you can say, wonderful, we've got this $3 billion sort of stash. The problem is, of course, where do you go with $3 billion of crypto to sort of pop it out into pounds or dollars or yuan or whatever you want to use? There's a number of things about that. Firstly, money laundering, and this is something I kind of realized having written the book, really, buys you time. That layering stage where you throw the pursuers off the scent, you can breathe a sigh of relief and go, right, okay, now the money's clean. They're not going to come after it. Now I can work out what to do with it. And in cryptocurrency terms, you can watch and see what happens to the price, because the price of the cryptocurrency might go up. You might be able to sell it at an advantageous stage. You can eke it out. If you're sitting on a $3 billion crypto stash, which apparently North Korea is, you can say, well, I'm going to free up a few hundred thousand there, maybe 10,000 there. You can also move it to where it's needed. So I had this idea that all the money comes back to North Korea, and Kim Jong-un rolls around on a bed of banknotes laughing maniacally. No, that's not the case. There's nothing really to buy in North Korea. The stuff North Korea wants exists in other countries, ball bearings in Frankfurt and, heat shield technology in Argentina. And that's where you want the money. So North Korea can move, using crypto, can move the money around to where it's needed. The other thing about this is, do you even need to pop the money out of the crypto world into real fiat money? Say real fiat money like pounds and dollars, or you could say to somebody, well, look, we need to pay you 10 million for this deal. Here's the crypto wallet. Here's the password. Here's a USB stick with the crypto wallet details on it. There's the password. We've now paid you 10 million. It's similar to when thieves steal artworks, and there's this whole thing. Well, why would you steal the artwork? You can't sell it because it's obvious. The artwork becomes a token. If one crime gang owes another crime gang $1 million, they give them the keys to the safe deposit box where the artwork is stored and say, well, there's your millions. It's in that safe deposit box. It becomes a token you can move around. So, yeah, that integration stage, that last stage where you sort of pop the money out, as it were, there's lots of different ways of either doing that or not doing it but still getting the advantages you want.
One of the key tools that money launderers use is the whole concept of mules. And you spend some time talking about that. I don't know if you actually have a Snapchat account that you decided to be a mule, but you look at that, and that's an area where I think society needs to obviously focus, because these are often kind of innocent people who get caught up for a few pounds or dollars to assist with money launderers. So again, kind of shine a light on that for us. Yeah,
it's interesting. So that sort of goes completely the other way from technology, and this is sort of street level money laundering. What you're doing is getting effectively teams of people to go to cash points or to bureau de change or to post offices and withdraw the cash for you. And that's a key part of that layering stage I talked about. Once the stuff's been withdrawn in cash, it's pretty much vanished. It's really hard for law enforcement to sort of trace that money. But obviously you need a bunch of people to do that. You need these sort of money mules. Technology, interestingly, is playing a role there in recruiting the money mules. Social media has been an absolute boon for those recruitment exercises. Right now, you can go on Snapchat and Instagram, type in a few key hashtags, and find dozens and dozens of accounts where people say, "You give me the bank details for your account. Don't give me, don't put any money in the account. Empty the account out so the account's clean. I'm not going to steal your money, but you just give me the login. You give me the details. I'll put a few thousand through, and I'll leave a few hundred for you." Now, obviously, during lockdown, people started struggling for work. We then had the financial crisis, the cost of living crisis. People were struggling for income, and some people looked at this and thought, "Do you know what? Is this even a crime?" I think a lot of it thought of it a bit like home taping. Is ripping a CD really a crime? Now, obviously, it is, and it's interesting you say there. These are innocent victims. Yes and no. There are some people who get pulled into this who don't realise the full scale of it, but frankly, there's no such thing as a free lunch. If somebody's offering you 500 quid for like using your account for an hour, clearly something's dodgy about that. So these people, interestingly, in Ireland, where I've concentrated on in the book, these people are getting pulled into the courts. They're getting often suspended sentences, but custodial sentences nonetheless, suspended custodial sentences. In the UK, it's completely different. In the UK, from what I can see, if you get caught doing this, of being a money mule, you get what's called a CFS marker. So CFS is a body that works with all the big banks and so on, and a lot of the other banks. And if somebody's caught for money laundering, money muling, their account's shut down, and the bank reports them to CFS and says, look, suspicious stuff going on here. If that individual then goes to another bank and tries to set up a new account, that bank looks at the CFS list and goes, oh, wait, you were caught muling for somebody down some bank down the road. No account for you, buddy. So in a way, you could say, well, that's not as bad as being dragged into court and given a custodial sentence. But in a way, at least that's more direct and more transparent. There are people in the UK wandering around who've been caught for money muling, don't even realise it, and are going to get an unpleasant surprise when they go to the bank and try and open an account. And that marker can last for years, on your account.
So when I sort of flick through the book, as I was just then and hit the microphone, sorry, it's amazing how many countries are mentioned in each kind of individual chapter. And this is, I find, quite striking, just how you have sort of Nigeria linked to the UAE, linked to North Korea, and so on. So, I mean, is that why is that? Why are these schemes so kind of global in their nature?
It's interesting. I mean, for a start, with a lot of cybercrime and increasingly financial crime, it sort of doesn't matter who you're collaborating with and where they are. Because things like cryptocurrency run internationally, if you've got somebody who's good at laundering cryptocurrency, you don't really care where they are. They could be in, Vietnam, Venezuela, doesn't really matter. So, cybercrime is able to work internationally. There is a sense also that there's a useful side effect for that, in that you get this kind of jurisdictional arbitrage where, if there's a crime committed, the law enforcement agency, the police look into it, and they go, okay, right, so we think the culprit is now in country X. We think they were collaborating with somebody in country Y. There's also a connection to country Z. Right, now we've got 3 countries. We've got to try and put out mutual legal assistance treaty requests to 3 countries, possibly in 3 different languages, work out who to address those to, and then when those assistance requests land on the desk of police force in countries X, Y, and Z, how much priority they're going to give it, the UK police are after us some information from us. Well, we'll put that one to the bottom of the pile. So it's difficult for law enforcement to trace these crimes, and I think the criminals know that. They know that if they collaborate across multiple jurisdictions, they can use that to their advantage.
Yeah, it's certainly the case that I think pretty much all of these schemes operate best across borders, and actually, yes, the borders are the criminals' friends, and often, as you say, an impediment for law enforcement. So we have to talk about Hush Puppy. Everyone's heard of Hush Puppy and his Instagram account and everything else. What was it about that story that meant you had to put it in the book?
Well, yeah, so there's the remarkable story of Hush Puppy, who was originally from Nigeria, ends up in Dubai, becomes an Instagram influencer with something like 2.3 million followers, and does what influencers do, which I find a bizarre world. You pose in your Gucci pajamas on your private jet, in your Yeezy trainers, and millions of people like that picture and follow you, and then those companies will give you more free stuff, and you pose in it, and this is a money generating spiral. But of course, the question is like, how do you afford your first pair of Yeezys or Givenchy slacks or whatever? And the answer to that in Hush Puppy's case was crime. He was committing frauds all around the world and was laundering money. Comes to the attention of the North Koreans, who used him to launder the proceeds from one of their hacks, a hack on a bank in Malta called Banco Valletta. What's interesting, and the reason it went into the book, was I completely screwed something up. When in Lazarus Heist, the previous book, I wrote about this case and Hush Puppy's collaboration with the North Koreans. And then I got a message on LinkedIn from a guy called Matt O'Neill, who worked for the United States Secret Service. And he said, I read the Lazarus Heist and enjoyed the book. By the way, the Hush Puppy case you seem to have credited to the FBI, and actually it was our case, which happens an annoying amount, I think, for the Secret Service. They've seen quite a few cases, big up the FBI and leave their role out. So I said, I'm really sorry, but I'm writing about this again in this new book. Can you tell me that, I'll interview you about it. And what's brilliant is when you look at the sort of Hush Puppy case and the investigation, it seems a bit like, the police got on his trail and then they managed to track him down. They managed to extradite him and arrest him. It sounds like it went reasonably smoothly, but you'd speak to the Secret Service and there were so many twists and turns in that case. There were so many moments where almost went horribly wrong for them. And so the twists and the turns and the drama of that, I just thought was amazing. And that story's not been told. I mean, the Secret Service haven't spoken about this publicly before. And so suddenly you get this whole story coming out. And what's amazing is Hush Puppy gets all the attention, right? Because he's got the 3 million Instagram followers, 2.3 million Instagram followers. Actually, the more important link in the chain was his accomplice, who went by the name Big Boss, who turns out to be a Canadian called Haleb Alamari. Big Boss is the guy who actually knows where all the bodies are buried. He was the guy who was running all of these schemes. He got Hush Puppy involved. Big Boss knows all of the details. I am obsessed. I would so love to interview both of them, but particularly Big Boss. I have written to them multiple times in prison. They're both in Fort Dix, New Jersey. No joy on the interview as yet.
Well, maybe you should have made a conscious mistake in the book about one of them, and they had written to you and said, "No, let me tell you the story myself." Now, I think you have a somewhat unhealthy obsession with North Korea. Maybe it's because they're smart tech people like you. So the kind of penultimate chapter, the last story in the book, is entitled Tornado Cash, and that is just the sort of ultimate mashup of everything that I can imagine you were looking for in terms of tech and money laundering and North Korea and online gaming and everything else. So let's spend a bit of time going through that, and in particular what we should be kind of learning from that story.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in North Korea because you get to cover two things for the price of one. You get to cover nation-state hacking, well-resourced, lengthy, strategic, but also cybercrime, because North Korea is accused of committing these crimes and stealing money to evade sanctions to get money into the country. So you can look at it from a cybercrime point of view, a pure crime point of view, or you can look at it from a sort of geopolitical nation-state type point of view. And that case, the Tornado Cash case, that penultimate chapter, as you say, has everything in it. It was almost like somebody thought of the thing that I wanted in that chapter and put it all in there. So basically back in 2022, there's a video game called Axie Infinity. Axie Infinity was effectively a mashup between a video game and cryptocurrency. So you'd play this video game, you'd wrestle your little characters, you had cartoon characters in the game. Those characters were actually crypto assets. They were a bit like bitcoins that you could move around. And so players started playing the game and actually started making money because they could buy and sell the characters in the game, they could buy and sell assets in the game. So people actually started to make a living out of this. Some people in particularly the Philippines, where the game was popular, were actually playing the game full time as a job. And you got this weird hype cycle, incorporating, the sort of obsessive nature of video gaming, but also the kind of massive valuation fluctuations and increases in cryptocurrency prices. So this game became hugely popular and valuable. I mean, the company that made Axie Infinity, Sky Mavis, was valued at $2 billion at one point. Astonishing values. Hackers break in to the game. They realize how the game is set up. They realize where the money is. And they managed to steal $625 million from inside the game, which I've been a bit circumspect in the book about this, but I'm more forthright after the book's published. It is a serious contender for the biggest theft of all time, that. If you look at like one victim, one hack, one job, valued at the time of the theft, 625 million, it's hard to find a theft that's actually bigger than that. I mean, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist, for example, from I think it was 1990, they stole artworks, very valuable artworks, but they valued at 500 million at the time. So Axie is a huge job. And what's amazing is transferring out that money, because it's all in the form of crypto, took them 1 minute, 55 seconds. So suddenly you've got this glut of money. Now, the reason the chapter is called Tornado Cash is in order to launder that huge stash of money, they dropped most of it into Tornado Cash, which is a mixer. You put your cryptocurrency in, it mixes it, as the name suggests, with others' cryptocurrency, and then spits it out to a fresh wallet address. Now, obviously, that's money laundering in this case. They managed to launder like $455 million. So the US authorities went after Tornado Cash and sanctioned Tornado Cash and said, look, you have laundered money on behalf of a sanctioned entity. You are now a sanctioned entity. So no one in the US, people, organizations, no one can interact with Tornado Cash on pain of being sanctioned, prosecuted for sanctions busting themselves. The problem with that for the tech and crypto community was they said, well, hang on, you can't sanction Tornado Cash. Tornado Cash is just code. If somebody gets stabbed, you don't prosecute the person who made the knife, you prosecute the person who did the stabbing. And also code code is speech, it's written language. We're protected freedom of speech constitutionally. And also, there's a dangerous precedent here in that, if I create code today and 5 years down the line someone misuses my code, do you come after me? Am I responsible for all the downstream consequences? So for all these reasons, quite a few in the tech and crypto community just hated that decision on sanctioning. And I'm actually suing the US government in the courts at the moment, the US Treasury, saying your sanctioning completely overstepped your bounds, is misguided. And actually what we want this tool for, Tornado Cash, is privacy. We want privacy because everything's visible on the blockchain. How do we get privacy if we don't have Tornado Cash? The US authorities say, well, you can't have Tornado Cash because it can be used by money launderers, so you can't have it. So there's this battle going on for that piece of technology and technology like it, which is putting the tech and crypto community head to head with the sort of forces of authority, if you like, and money laundering is the sort of front line of that battle.
So that's a great way to put it, the front line of the battle. I think in the book you talk about kind of money laundering 2.0. So maybe just sort of start to close out. Obviously, we have the traditional tools that we try and use to combat money laundering. We have technology that law enforcement is increasingly able to use to track crypto payments and all the rest of it. But where do you think this story goes next? What will your third book be about? If we're going to be talking about money laundering 2.0, yeah. What would, as someone who understands the tech and is kind of, if you like, really now immersed in the money laundering topic, what would you be advising people to do in order to ensure that we keep up with, if not stay ahead of this new form of money laundering?
It's interesting. You've got sort of two kind of environments going on here. So in the traditional finance environment, you've got banks increasingly introducing new technology. Pandemic had a huge influence on this. Online banking obviously became the only option. The banks were closed. Before the pandemic, as the lockdown started to happen, I got a bit drunk and I decided to try and go to the supermarket to find the shelves. I was that person who stood in front of the empty shelves, that got photographed and put on social media. And I thought, wow, I'll tell you the next thing to run out. Next thing will be cash points will run out. So I'll get the cash point, I'll withdraw 500 quid, and then I've got cash. And then, of course, I had 500 quid cash. All the banks closed and no one accepted cash anymore. So I found myself with 500 quid just sitting in my drawer. And it took ages to find a bank that was open to redeposit it. So during lockdown, we just got used to this idea of online banking. We get challenger banks being set up, Monzo and Revolut and all these sorts of services. So that trend is towards more tech, faster tech, cross-border payments, frictionless, experiences. There's huge parts of banks that are being tasked with that. Let's make this seamless, high-tech experience for our customers. Money launderers are going to use that. That's absolutely true. Particularly faster payments. If you can bounce money through multiple different accounts quickly, you throw the pursuers off the track. That's going to be used. But because traditional finance is regulated, there are some levers governments can pull to sort of control this. So yes, those tech innovations will happen in traditional finance, but we can rein that in to a certain extent and control the money laundering fallout from that. What you've got now, though, is this whole edifice of non-traditional bank and non-TradFi, as they call it, non-TradFi stuff. So we talked about cryptocurrency. Yes, you've also got things like NFTs. You've got video game marketplaces. I mean, Axie Infinity, who knew there was hundreds of millions sloshing about in Axie Infinity? There's all these stores of monetary value around the world in things that aren't in traditional finance. You've got very few levers to pull there. Sanctioning these entities is all the US government could do with Tornado Cash, at least at first. So how do you pull the levers on all of those things? And also, when you do pull those levers and you try and rein in that new technology, those new types of technology, the reaction you will get from the crypto and tech community, to a certain extent from some of them, is back off, hands off, we built this. You come in here with your traditional finance rules, which, by the way, haven't done particularly well. Look at, financial crisis 2008 and so on, and the fines on banks for money laundering. But you come in here with those rules that police your old TradFi world, and you try and apply them to us in our new code? No way. And if you try and do it, we'll just code our way around it. We will come up with some new technology, some new invention that will just leapfrog the controls you just put in place.
But do you think those people are willing to engage with trying to deal with the criminal elements that abuse their wonderful technology?
That's a fascinating question. I think there's a classic sort of bell curve going on where at one end there's people who really want to be regulated. It's like, we are a crypto firm, or we're running new types of finance, and boy do we want regulation. In fact, there's some people clamoring for more regulation to say, look, just give us the rules so we can obey them, and that way we can get investment and we can set up shop and be nice and clean. In the middle, there's companies that, frankly, regulation's a bit of a pain. If they have to do it, fine, but they'd really rather not. But they're sort of ambivalent. At the extreme end, the other end of the bell curve, is probably a small minority who, like I say, look at this and go, screw your rules, screw you, we're creating a new technology because this is our new world. Now, those people, it's really interesting. If you say to them, you do realize the cost of what you're doing is that money laundering can happen. There are people out there, and I've interviewed some of them for the book, who say, look, for us, privacy, freedom of speech, new finance is so important that, yes, we are prepared to tolerate $500 million worth of money laundering by the most dangerous country on earth. That is literally the price. The literal price of privacy and freedom of speech is that, and we'll pay it. That's not everybody, but the reason it's worth paying attention to that end of the bell curve, that small minority who have those fairly extreme libertarian views, they write the code. Our history is being written, our future is being written by the people who write the code, and it's worth listening to what those people are saying, understanding it, and also understanding the tech that they built, and seeing if they can be sort of folded in more to the kind of, people ready to accept or at least tolerate regulation. So that's the sort of conversation that's going on.
And of course, the criminals only need a small minority in order to achieve what they achieved. Geoff, thank you very much indeed for your time. I'm going to end with the quote of Sir David Oman from the back of the book. It's a gripping and surprising true crime drama without, so far, a happy ending. Maybe your next book will deliver that happy ending. Geoff, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.